You and I encountered something. I will speak of it obliquely for the moment. We encountered an analysis of where we are with respect to COVID that is very challenging. And I was struck by the fact that apparently this analysis was pulled down from YouTube within 2 hours of being put up. Now, I expected something like what we ran into with Plandemic and Judy Mikovich, where you and I separately watched that video and alarm bells were regularly ringing about the analysis. There were things about it that were clearly wrong.
There was also that video put out by the Kern County doctors early on, which is different from Plandemic, but similarly, I mean, we did an analysis of it, and it just nothing
didn't stand up.
Nothing worked.
Right.
There,
now,
really.
In neither case would I, and I assume you, advocate that these things shouldn't be viewable.
Right. Both of those were also pulled down, and they shouldn't have been.
Right.
Right.
But this analysis that we've most recently seen is very, very challenging. And I have to say, I think the assumption has to be that there is something seriously wrong with it. But the person advancing the analysis is very well credentialed, which is also arguably the case in Judy Mikovich's case, and the Kern County doctors also had a clinical background. So anyway, these were not kooks with no position from which to speak. But in this case, we've got somebody who's really well positioned, and he makes a very interesting argument, which I will say I now think I know how to test. But here's the problem. It was pulled down from YouTube in 2 hours. It is now viewable on a blockchain-based video site that effectively protects it from, from interference of, below a certain level.
LBRY? Is that it?
I don't think so, but I'm not sure. In any case, here's the problem. We have a YouTube channel. That YouTube channel is subject to guidelines that are impenetrable and unfollowable. To discuss this question,
for us to talk about
it leaves open the possibility that Google will decide we are over some line that we would obviously argue and most certainly win the argument that the line is nowhere near this, that this is a discussable, hypothetico-deductive question, that there are proper tools to be brought to bear on it. But the fact is, the guidelines themselves are vague. There is no...
The community guidelines of Google.
Right. There is no court in which you can plead your case. The fact that the video was pulled down in the first place says that Google has taken up the opinion that a discussion of this, because the presentation itself is responsible, right? It makes arguments that are evaluatable. It suggests that Google takes a view that I would argue is indefensible, but there's nowhere to make that argument.
It suggests, just like we were talking about at the beginning of the hour, that there is this vision of what science is in blue team's heads, that once we have an answer that we've agreed on, that is the truth. And no further evidence can possibly take that truth off its pedestal, because that has always been, will always be true. And that, of course, is not at all how science works. So what we want to do, and what we have been doing, is speak to the uncertainty and weigh evidence and talk about what it would mean if. But in this case, it would be really, really dangerous to us.
It would be dangerous, and there is no mechanism to figure out ahead of time what comes of it, right? Or, what line, Google can be wrong about what the line is, but it could be specific about it so that we could say the line doesn't belong here. But in the interest of continuing to be able to talk about these things, we'll stay on the side of it. But there is no line is the problem. The line is a judgment call to some unaccountable mechanism. So here's the predicament. You and I were driven out of very secure jobs by nonsense. We are fortunate that the tools with which to architect a different livelihood exists in the world, right? we were able to, we didn't have to build a server farm to serve videos to every corner of the world. That thing simply exists. You can sign up, build your channel, the tools, to sell merchandise or whatever. All of these things are just available there. And that's a marvelous thing to exist. But the problem is they are all subject to the veto of an unaccountable authority that delivers guidelines that you cannot adhere to. The only way to be anywhere close to certain that your livelihood will continue into next week is to say, so far, basically to do the bidding of those who would control speech, right? You have to stay away from anything that could be understood, and maybe this is another place to point it out. The reason that something like Google might decide that we can't have a discussion about the validity or lack of validity of this expert's point about current COVID and its apparent resurgence, that has again to do with the difference in analysis between the individual and the collective. In effect, what Google is doing is they are deciding that a discussion of this will cause individuals to make decisions that are not in our collective interest. And so Google has decided for us that the way to address that problem is to inflict a conclusion as if it is absolutely secure, so that the actual analysis does not occur in public, so that nobody will draw what they consider to be the foregone wrong conclusion, right? So all of that is Google deciding what the answer to the question is, and therefore what people are to do in light of it. And this is completely intolerable. Heterodoxy does deal with all of these ambiguities. It does deal with the difference in level of analysis between the individual level and the collective level. And there's a lot to be said about it. But the world we are living in is one where we are free to make a living using tools provided by Google, but we dare not disagree with it about whether or not this can be discussed in public, right? And this is absolutely preposterous, and it raises all sorts of questions, as your Kundera passage does. Now, What does that have to do with Hitchens? So the point is, as I was describing this to a friend, he pointed me to a couple of quotes that come from Christopher Hitchens. Actually, will you put the first one up, Zach? Okay. Oh, boy. All right. It says, "The true essence of a dictatorship is in fact not in its regularity, but in its unpredictability and caprice. Those who live under it must never be able to relax, must never be quite sure if they have followed the rules correctly or not." And that's Christopher Hitchens from the book Hitch 22. You want to scroll down? Here's the other quote. "The essential principle of totalitarianism is to make laws that are impossible to obey." Christopher Hitchens from God is Not Great. So I have a principle from long ago, which I call the low posted speed limit.
Yes, you do.
And the low posted speed limit is a speed limit posted so low that a reasonable driver will almost certainly violate it. And what this allows you to do is punish those you like. So
you the state, you the police.
The state. If you're a cop in a town with a speed limit so low that everybody violates it, then you can pull over gays or Jews or long hairs or whoever you don't like, right? And the point is, the law does not read as if it is biased against.
The law is not bigoted,
right?
But it allows for bigotry to flourish.
Exactly. And so the arbitrariness and the caprice of the structure, the fact that the standard is set so low that enforcement is perfectly arbitrary or can be, allows all kinds of things to happen. And the fact that Hitchens connects this to totalitarianism, that he argues that this is in fact a feature and not a bug, that in order to make totalitarianism work, you have to constantly be looking over your shoulder with the fear that you have violated the rule, even if that wasn't your intent, because that thing can come back to haunt you, and in a dire manner, that is what keeps the thing humming. And to find that we are facing this in our relationship with these platforms that are frankly giving us all of these marvelous tools with which we might otherwise be, upgrading our collective understanding of things, but instead they're going to manage our collective understanding in ways that prevent people who do have relevant expertise from sharing it, discussing its possible implications, falsifying it in public, right, is absolutely disastrous.
So it really is a third thing that you've just said. So your low posted speed limit principle which is that you make a law which almost everyone breaks, such that the enforcement of that law allows individuals who are tasked with enforcing to enact their internal bigotry or whatever it is. That's one thing. That's what you have said. Hitchens says you make laws that are impossible to obey, which is different from low posted speed limit. Low posted speed limit is you tend not to obey them, but you could.
Yeah.
He says totalitarianism is the creation of laws that are impossible to obey. And then his third one, the one we started with, is the unpredictability and caprice of the rules, such that you never know. This is where we started with regard to, can we talk about some of this possible new COVID discussion that's coming out? We don't know. Google has not told us the community guidelines are vague, presumably intentionally, and this gets to Hitchens' point, right? That it is the unpredictability and caprice, and effectively, it's certainly related to your low posted speed limit, but I think it's distinct. I think these really are three distinct things, all of which we're seeing in play with things like the tech giants at the moment, who have such remarkable control over not just those of us who are creating and producing content, but all of us who are also consuming content and having the options before us changed by hidden forces that we cannot see nor intuit.
And I would say you either cannot figure out whether something is against the rules, or you can, but only putting your livelihood in jeopardy, which is not unlike what totalitarian regimes do. You do something and you may find yourself behind bars. And in this case, I do want to emphasize, though, there is something hauntingly familiar from these totalitarian regimes. There's also brand new stuff here. And one of my concerns is that because, and I actually did a little checking, because none of the phenomena which carry the hallmarks of totalitarianism or fascism check all of the boxes, right? We are going to persistently be in this state where we see hints of these things, but we never cross the final threshold there, because in fact, the list of characteristics that we have been led to expect are based on a historical world that we no longer live in. And so, we're not going to face fascism again of the same kind, but we're going to face something with those tendencies and very different tools. And, the worst thing here is that one of the tools in a world of platforms using algorithms to enforce arbitrary standards, there is a tendency, both naturally because it's simple, and arbitrarily and politically because it's expedient for each side to do it. There's a tendency to say, this is our team, here's what we believe. Anything outside of that zone is the enemy and is to be dealt with as such, which means that the surface of that bubble now cannot be penetrated with new information or, the stuff of upgrade, right? It can't be, because everything else is viewed as hostile and wrong. And so I think you and I are continually tripping over this, right? And the stuff around Unity being suspended at Twitter and the stuff about me being tossed off of Facebook has to do with the fact that these goddamn algorithms don't know what to do with heterodoxy, because in general, what they encounter is people who show themselves to be on one team or another. And if your litmus test for that is doesn't believe these things, then lots of us don't believe these things, but we also don't believe those things. And so the point is, your algorithm's no good here, right? Yeah,
there it is.
Heterodoxy renders the algorithm incapable of figuring out what you are, right? You're a platypus in a world where you've got, birds with bills and, mammals with fur, right? And, how much harm are we doing to our collective sense-making by virtue of stupid algorithms that are looking to put us in too few categories to deal with those of us who frankly might have something important to add to the conversation, but it's going to be, neutralized out of existence.
Yeah. So we have talked, and your brother has talked about trying to be ash negative, right? To not be the person who conforms to patently false things that are being said in your presence. Be the kind of person for whom the algorithms of big tech and everyone else are no good here. Be able to say your algorithm's no good here and figure out ways to obscure yourself from it, to hide from it, to evade it, to move forward without it seeing you. And I don't know what all of those ways are at all, but heterodox thinking is the way forward, not accepting an ideology that has been handed to you by blue or by red or by left or right or whoever it is. That if you've accepted an ideology because you agree with one thing in it and assume that therefore everything else is true, you are not an independent thinker and you are very likely to get conned.
Yeah, you're very likely to get conned is right. I will say I'm struck. I know some people weren't all that into us discussing Clubhouse, but this platform, this new platform that is still in beta but is growing in terms of its population, is revealing to those of us who are paying attention to it why this is so difficult. Because inside of this platform, and again, the platform is all spoken word real time. It's synchronous. You get into a room and you have a discussion with people, many of whom you don't know. But there is a feature in which you can block people, of course, like every other platform. But those blocks have an impact if somebody who is in a position, I think somebody is a moderator in a room where they've blocked you, you can't see that the room exists at all, which means that from the point of view of the people in the room, there is a tendency for the conversation to actually conform to a standard. So to the extent that, I might be disliked by people who are advancing the BLM banner, they may block me. It means I can't see the conversations they're having. I won't be present in those conversations, and they will have an artificially narrow view of the range of thought on this issue because people who are heterodox won't be there to speak. And so, it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't problem. They're trying to solve one problem and creating what I think is a much bigger problem in so doing. But you can just see that people...
I don't know the solution to that one, though. I don't think you can. I don't know anything about this platform. I've never been on it, but I don't think you can have a social media platform that doesn't allow you to block.
Well, you could allow people to individually block, and then there's no way to stop such a person.
I'm sorry. I missed something about the...
You individually block, but then the platform infers from your block that you are not welcome in certain spaces, so you can't even see that they exist. So instead of...
I see.
So it infers something that in some case, if you've got a troll there who's just making trouble,
sure,
right? You can imagine that you don't want such a person to show up in that room. But by doing that, you are creating power for those who would block. And in fact, this is an analog for the system that the other platforms have established in which they claim, an algorithm flagged you. Sorry, right? Why did the algorithm flag me? Oh, because a bunch of people reported you. Why did they report you? Oh, because they viewed you as on the other side. They were doing a political job by reporting you, which then triggered the algorithm, which then allowed the platform to decide what it thought of you, and it used the algorithm as an excuse.
Yeah. So your algorithm's no good here.